Hi everyone, Adam here. So today's video is another video on lifting history, and more specifically this one is about Olympic weightlifting, which is the OG of lifting weights. It's like, it's basically the original. It's been around the longest. You look at old school strongman, the stuff that we had before strongman became a real sport in the 1970s. Uh, Olympic weightlifting has been around for forever in comparison. The old school strongman stuff, where people were just kind of doing, odd tricks, to prove how strong they were, picking up heavy stones and carrying them around and stuff like that. Um, that was something that people did, but there was no defined system for competing or proving who was better or anything like that. And so Olympic weightlifting actually started in the late 1800s, and back then there were 6 different lifts. They had essentially the strict press, they had the clean and jerk, and they had the snatch, and they had one-hand and two-handed variants of each. Why anyone would primarily train with one-handed variants, it seems a little bit, it seems like it'd be crazy hard. First of all, I certainly wouldn't be able to do like me one-handed with a barbell. That's a recipe for bad news. But over time, similar to with powerlifting, things just started getting refined and just getting worked out and and shaved down to the right stuff. They didn't have weight classes at first, so they added weight classes over time. They took out the one-handed variations, and then in the 70s they started encountering this issue with the strict press, where athletes realized that one way to get stronger, to be able to handle a little bit more weight, was essentially to do an extreme back bend. At that point, your chest is taking over a little bit more of the lift, less of your shoulders, which are a smaller muscle group anyway. And so as a result, you are seeing that you can put up a little bit more weight. The problem, of course, is that you have to do this extreme back bend to get into that position, and that can be, hurting your back. It's harder for them to judge. It's harder for them to understand. It was just kind of a mess, and so they were like, what, let's just take this out entirely. So while the strict press is still obviously practiced for a variety of reasons, nowadays all we have are the standard two-handed snatch and two-handed clean and jerk. Pretty simple. Um, and some other interesting things. It's important to realize that when bodybuilding came after weightlifting, powerlifting came after weightlifting, strongman came after weightlifting, everything came after weightlifting. But back then, basically the only reason people lifted weights was if they wanted to get good at lifting weights, weightlifting. And so, people might squat and they might deadlift and they might overhead press, but they were only doing those lifts because they thought, oh, well, you know what, this makes me better at snatching or cleaning and jerking, which were considered, certainly the more important, more technically demanding, you had to practice them a lot more sort of lifts. They were considered the best, the overall best at everything, essentially. And, people only trained to get better at those, to get stronger at those. So, what happened was when, we started having stuff like bodybuilding, that it was totally confusing to them. Like, why would someone train for aesthetics? We don't get it. Why would you want to build these muscles? This physique looks weird to us. They didn't understand it. And it's crazy to think of that nowadays where, bodybuilding is so popular and where, physique is everything. But, that used to be a thing, certainly, back in the day. It was a totally different era, I guess. Another interesting thing is that essentially, weightlifting, it started off, probably a bit more popular in the US, but over time it's become much less popular. Very, very, very few people care about it nowadays. But it's still been, amazingly popular in countries like China and Russia. And so they continue to put up good performances every year. They continue to take home a lot of the medals. And they are the ones that there's this mystique that's developed around their training methods. China has always been kind of hard to for Americans at least to understand and borrow from. Russia has been a little bit more accessible, but not so much. And as a result, there's this mystique, like, oh, Russians, like all these Russian training secrets. And so, a lot of stuff today, a lot of, very popular common training methods are based on, old school Russian stuff that we found and brought over, really archaic stuff that, like people translated and brought over. And I've read some of it, so it's a little weird. But it's important to understand that the biggest thing that they have going for them is simply that they have huge populations and they have, people a lot more interested in it. So, whereas we might put our best athletes in the United States into football and baseball and, whatnot because they can make a lot more money, they're the kind of people that are putting their best athletes into weightlifting. And so that's part of the reason why, they're seeing, much better results than we are. That's a huge part of the reason. But as a result, it's declined in popularity in the U.S. extremely. It's not nearly as popular as it used to be. But interestingly enough, there's been a resurgence in recent years, and the entirety of the reason for that resurgence is CrossFit, because CrossFit has made it popular to do Olympic weightlifting again. At the same time, CrossFit popularized doing it for high repetitions, which is typically never done in Olympic style, Olympic weightlifting style training. And but it's the same lifts and people are getting interested in them again. I believe recently one of the female CrossFit Games competitors put up something like 10th in the world at the last Olympics. I honestly can't remember off the top of my head, but the point is that it's a resurgence. It's becoming popular again, and that's entirely thanks to CrossFit, which is astounding. It's astounding that it could do that. But I mean, once you put some money on the line and people are into something, it can happen, certainly. Yeah, that's basically that. I mean, aside from that, I mean, Olympic lifting does, I mean, like I kind of explained earlier, it's you squat, you deadlift, and you overhead press to get better at Olympic lifts because, these are component parts of the much larger thing that is an Olympic lift. But it's important to understand that because of the way Olympic lifts are structured, you start off on the ground, you get the weight overhead at the very end of the movement. So there's a few cool things as a result of that. One is that the lift is almost entirely eccentric with zero concentric phase. What that means is that the entirety of the lift you're raising the bar. You're never lowering the bar. When you do a bench press, you lower the bar and then you raise it. When you do a squat, you lower the bar and then you raise it. When you do a deadlift, you raise it, and then you lower it, or maybe you drop it. But with the Olympic lifts, it's all raising, and then you drop it. And so, as a result, the Olympic lifts can actually be, the eccentric phase where you're dropping the bar essentially, is a bit more stressful on the joints usually, and you're usually a little bit stronger in it too. But it's where you get a lot of the soreness from. Olympic lifting, on the other hand, just drops it instead of dealing with any of that. So it can be, relatively easy to recover from some pretty crazy volumes of training that you wouldn't expect compared to, other styles of lifting. And this is why, for example, we have stuff like Prilipin's chart, which was originally developed for Russian weightlifting, but which has since been adapted for powerlifting by, again, cutting it way down simply because, again, powerlifting is more stressful, takes more to recover from. Yeah, at the same time, it's interesting, and that necessitates equipment differences too. Like I explained in the powerlifting video, they have to drop it from overhead, so they have to have plates and bars that can withstand the shock of being dropped repeatedly. So the plates tend to be made of rubber instead of iron. That means that they're a bit bigger, wider. That is, because they're the same diameter, obviously, but they're wider, and that means that you can't fit as many plates on a single bar, but it doesn't usually matter because when you're training for Olympic lifting anyway, again, you're not handling as much weight as you would with, a power lift. And at the same time, they also, for competition's sake, when you have weight plates designed for Olympic lifting, they are typically all the exact same diameter no matter how much they weigh. So you might have a 10-pound that's the same diameter as a 45-pound. And the reason that that's different is, of course, again, because all the plates are, they're the same size, they're just not as wide. Versus in, your standard gym setting, the plates will be more powerlifting, looking, with, your 10 will be much smaller, but you know, more roughly the same. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, point is different plates, different bars, and that's kind of the biggest difference in terms of, you know, equipment needs. They do need it to be a little bit more fine-tuned, a little bit more controlled. So, you know, Olympic lifters can get a little bit picky about everything, you know, every little piece of equipment here and there. But again, it's that's what you tend to see in kind of Olympic lifting gyms, which again, less popular in the United States than probably powerlifting, so probably not very common, but they do exist. They are, you know, they are out there in the world. It's a thing you could certainly look into. Oh man, that's really about it for Olympic lifting. I mean, don't call it Olympic lifting if you're talking to an Olympic lifter. They like to call it weightlifting and nothing else, because it is the OG. Again, it is back when that was the only way that people lifted weights. Um, but yeah, it takes a remarkable amount of time to really learn and nail down the lifts. Certainly more technical, more skill based than some of the, you know, some of the other lifts that you tend to see in strength sports. But you know, it is what it is. So as always, like, comment, share. Tell me what you want to see in future videos. I will talk to you guys next time. Have a good one.